Welcome to the Ghostly Gallery podcast, a place where we explore the world of horror in film, television, books, and popular culture. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. My name is Bruce Markison. As always, I'm joined by producer and co-host Tracy Asteria. Tracy, welcome to the Ghostly Gallery. How are you?
I'm doing good, Bruce. It's a long weekend here in Canada. We're celebrating Canada Day, and it is a wild and windy and very rainy holiday, but it's given me a chance to catch up on some TV and get cracking on that movie list. So, yeah, it's not too bad. How's everything going with you?
Good. You'll have to tell me more about Canada Day. Is that sort of the equivalent of our 4th of July?
It is. It's one of the biggest holidays. And where I live, there's actually a huge fireworks kind of like celebration that they have on Canada Day. Except for this year, I don't know if they're going to have it. The fair grounds are all rained out, and it's not looking promising for tomorrow evening's fireworks, which is
interesting.
Not fun.
This show, by the way, is going to debut on the 4th of July, 2024, by some coincidence. And that, of course, is always a day that we look forward to, kind of the midpoint of the summer in some ways, although, frankly, it seems like summer just got started and winter just ended not that long ago. This, by the way, is episode number 45 for the Ghostly Gallery, so we're slowly but surely making our way toward the milestone of 50. Now, earlier in June, Tracy, we had sad news. We lost the highly respected actor Donald Sutherland, who died in his late 80s. I believe he was 88. Venerable actor, a guy that was a veteran of nearly 200 movies and television shows. He was never your classic leading man. He wasn't what I guess you would call traditionally handsome, but he had an interesting look, and he was able to kind of change that look, sometimes radically, from one film to another. You always knew it was him, but he didn't look the same from movie to movie to movie. He was a guy who was incredibly versatile. He also gave kind of quirky and offbeat performances. He would always kind of take his role and give it his own personal twist, and I guess that's the mark of a great actor, at least one of the marks. He starred in films in numerous genres, including dramas and comedies. And I would say in those movies, he probably achieved most of his fame. But he also really made his mark in horror films. Here is a top-tier actor who appeared in a number of horror films, both near the beginning of his career, toward the middle, also at the end. 1964, he actually made his feature film debut. He'd done some television work before this, but it was his first feature film. It was a movie called Castle of the Living Dead, where he actually played two roles, one of which was a witch. Kind of interesting. And that was a movie that starred Christopher Lee, who at the time was, of course, very well known. Then the following year, 1965, still very young and relatively unknown as an actor, Sutherland appeared in the first of those great Amicus anthologies, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. Remember, it was a few months ago that we talked to our friend Josh Hitchens about all 7 of those Amicus anthologies, including Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. So in that one, there was a segment called Vampire, in which Sutherland appears. Relatively small role in the context of the anthology, but still an important role. And then in 1973, he and famous actress Julie Christie took on starring roles in a very haunting film, disturbing film called Don't Look Now. It's about a couple grieving the death of their young daughter. And given the subject matter here and really how depressing it can be, it can be a hard movie to watch. But still very powerful. Also was a controversial film because of very explicit love scene that appeared involving Christie and Sutherland in that one. It's a film that has really developed a following. People still talk about it to this day. Now, if we jump ahead from 1973 to 1987, Sutherland starred in really a little-known movie called The Rosary Murders. Now, I have not yet seen this one, but I'll give you a little bit of a recap, and then Tracy will offer some more thoughts on it. Tracy has seen it. So the movie's about a serial killer who is, for some reason, murdering only priests and nuns, and then he leaves a black rosary as his calling card, hence the Rosary Murders. The killer then kind of gives a confession to a priest, Father Kessler, played by Sutherland. And Kessler is now faced with a dilemma. Well, what do I do? Do I honor the sanctity of the confessional, which is what you're supposed to do according to Catholic religion? Or do I give this information to the local police and help them with their ongoing investigation? So it's one that sounds intriguing. It's one that I would like to see. It is available in streaming. But you have seen it, Tracy. What are your thoughts on it?
Oh my goodness. I really enjoyed this movie. It's a thriller type movie. There's no real horror aspect to it, but it was pretty intense actually. It was really interesting to see Donald Sutherland in the role of a priest, and he did such an excellent job with it. He was really very believable, and he brought such a human side to that of the priest. It was a great storyline and a terrific thriller. It kind of left you on the edge of the seat at different times. What's weird is because it was like an 80s movie, it had a real 70s feel to it. It was really strange like that, but everything that I watched and just kind of like the scenery really felt like a 70s flick. He was fantastic in it, and you definitely need to watch that when you have a chance. I don't want to give too much away, but, kind of throughout the movie, there was, I want to say, a hint of a little bit of a love story to it, which never came to fruition. But it was just a different take. And I really enjoyed the movie. It was quite the thriller for sure. You don't expect some of those different twists. And Charles Durning was actually in the movie as well, which I wasn't aware of until I started viewing it. So it was really quite good.
And he plays a priest too, which I kind of find hard to imagine. Charles Durning is a priest. That doesn't seem to fit.
I know, right? That's why I was kind of surprised when I saw him on there.
Yeah.
He was pretty good. He was a jittery type character, and yeah, it was quite an interesting watch.
Sutherland is definitely the lead, right?
He is. He's in every single scene pretty much, and I believe he was around 51 or 52 when he played that role, and he just looks so young, young and very iconic.
Well, as we continue looking back at some of these films that he did, more recent years, Sutherland has continued to do work in the horror genre. 2005, he did a movie called An American Haunting, which is based on the famous Bell Witch story. Got mediocre reviews, but was kind of a stylish film from what I hear, what I read. And then even more recent than that, 2022, this would have been one of the last films that he did, called Mr. Harrigan's Phone. And that is actually a movie based on a Stephen King novella. And he was really pretty much acting almost to the end of his life. I know he had been ill reportedly for a number of years. So these are a few of the horror roles or thriller type roles that he filled during his long career in Hollywood. But in what really was his most famous horror role, Tracy, he played the protagonist in the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Great horror and sci-fi movie. So he starred as Matthew Bennell, a highly intelligent San Francisco scientist who is soon approached by his friend, another scientist named Elizabeth Driscoll. So she tells Matthew that her boyfriend is suddenly acting very strangely, kind of cold, distant, doesn't really seem to be there. And rather shockingly, she says to Bennell, I think he might actually be an imposter. Well, Bennell, being very logical, reasoned guy, is initially skeptical about this. But then after a while, he comes to believe his friend Elizabeth. And he comes to suspect that something is wrong. And even more disturbing, similar things are starting to happen to some of his other friends as well. It's becoming almost a contagion, an epidemic, if you will. And then Bennell eventually discovers that an alien life form that has settled onto Earth and taken on the form of flower-like pods has the goal of taking over the bodies of all human residents. So it has kind of an apocalyptic feeling after just a little bit of the movie has gone by. Well, after becoming aware of all of this, Sutherland's character, Matthew Bennell, tries to inform the police, only to discover that they're not really interested in helping. Seems like they've been infiltrated too. So it really is a film that creates this sense of paranoia. Sutherland starts to wonder who I can turn to. He headlines a great cast. I mean, this is one of the best casts you're going to see for a horror sci-fi movie. In addition to Sutherland, you've got Brooke Adams, Leonard Nimoy, of course, from Star Trek. Also, a very young Jeff Goldblum plays a key role here. And what I think is a great move, there's a cameo by the longtime actor Kevin McCarthy. He had actually been the star of the 1956 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. He's in the film just very briefly in the remake, but he makes his presence felt, and it's always good to see Kevin McCarthy in a horror movie. One of the really interesting images the film leaves you with, there's actually at one point an appearance of a dog that has a human face. That's always a little bit concerning when that comes up. So that's kind of the storyline, some background on the film. Tracy, let's get your thoughts on this classic movie starring Donald Sutherland.
Well, Bruce, since you mentioned it, the appearance of the dog with a human face, that totally threw me for a loop when I watched this film last night. I wasn't expecting that part at all. And man, that was really weird. It looked so strange. And whoever added that image was definitely going for a moment to remember. I think it was only on the screen for like maybe 5 seconds or so, but it was memorable. And interestingly enough, I read that the effect was truly just a dog wearing a human face mask. And by sheer coincidence, the dog stuck its tongue out through the mask at the exact same time that you see on the film, just to make it that extra touch of bizarre and creepy. I honestly don't recall if I've ever seen the original, but I thought this remake was great. I remember seeing it like many moons ago, and just like I said, mentioned, I watched it again last night. For a movie from, was it 1978? It was really well done. And I thought it was really cool to see Leonard Nimoy, because really, I only really know him from Star Trek. And Jeff Goldblum, he was super young, and that was really kind of quirky to see too. And another fantastic actor, Veronica Cartwright. I thought she was pretty epic. I recall seeing her in a few other projects, but in this movie, she was really, really good. And she was so well suited for this character. I thought she was excellent at mimicking like a pod person without being a pod person. And her mannerisms seem to be kind of like the same in the different roles that I've seen her in. So I thought she was excellent. And of course, Donald Sutherland, I wasn't aware, but he actually performed all of his own stunts in this movie too. And, some of them are kind of dangerous towards the end. And, just a fun little fact with his curly hair. We're not used to seeing that on Donald Sutherland. It was actually a perm. He sat in the chair and he had a perm for that role. So that was an interesting tidbit that I read. But I love this movie. I thought it was pretty cool.
We're going to talk more about Sutherland in a moment, but let's go back to Leonard Nimoy. He plays a character very different from Mr. Spock here.
Yes, he does. I was really, I don't want to say the term weirded out, but it was really different for me to see him in that kind of a role. But it was just so great to see him in like a different type of character role.
With Sutherland, it's interesting. You mentioned the curly hair, the perm. It gives him kind of a goofy look in a way, even though he's the lead and he's very much a heroic protagonist here. But I guess that kind of fits in with him. He always gave you something a little bit offbeat, whether it was his appearance, his manner of speaking, the way he looked around the room. I guess it's kind of typical Sutherland that we get something like this.
Oh, absolutely. And, it kind of carried over that perm hairstyle to a couple other roles that were filmed about the same kind of time period too. But yeah, definitely quirky. I think that's the only time we really ever saw him with curly hair.
Very interesting, too. I was not aware that he did all his own stunts. We don't think of him as an athletic actor, just like we don't think of Vincent Price in that way. And yet
Mhm.
in I think it's 1965 movie, The Last Man on Earth, a zombie film, he does all not really stunts, but all the physical activity of lugging those corpses around. He kind of does that all by himself. It's not a double that does it. We don't think of Vincent Price as an athletic actor. Sutherland, same thing, but he's able to pull it off here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the man, he was like 6'4", so he wasn't small. He was rather large. And, you know, towards the end of the movie where he's like scaling those ladders and, at that warehouse scene, like that's all him. And there was a slight little misstep, I guess, during filming. And granted, the scene turned out fine, but, it could have gone the other way. But just the guy wanted to do his own stunts and he did well with it.
Yeah, very admirable. Well, without
Mhm.
question, he's the dominant character in this film. He's given the most lines. He's in most of the scenes. Really delivers one of the best performances of his career, whether you're talking horror, comedy, drama. When I think of Donald Sutherland, I guess the two movies that come to mind, well, MASH is one. That's a comedy
Mhm.
where he plays Hawkeye Pierce before Alan Alda did that. And then the other movie is this one, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. This is really one of those iconic roles for him. He's this reasoned and logical Matthew Bennell. He's a guy that you're kind of rooting for, and you're rooting for him right until the end when we get a rather shocking conclusion. For those who have not seen it, I don't want to say anything more, but it's one of the best endings to any horror film that's ever been done. This, Tracy, really is one of the classic examples of a remake that turned out better than the original. Now, you had mentioned you had not seen the first film from 1956 with Kevin McCarthy. It's a black and white movie. It's done in a small town, and it's done with less gore is not the right word, because I don't think 78 film is really gory, but it's done in maybe a more subtle 1950s fashion. It's more of an innocent film, if there is such a thing, when you've got aliens trying to take over human beings. It's a good movie. It's a solid movie from 56. But I
Mhm.
really think the 78 remake achieves a higher level of acclaim. And I think most diehard horror fans would probably fall into the category of saying they prefer 78 over 56. One of the real strengths of this movie, it creates a tremendous sense of paranoia in the viewer. You just start wondering after a while, who can Bennell trust? Can he trust anybody? It just seems like the number of good people that have not yet been taking over is shrinking by the moment. And it really does give you that almost Twilight Zone feel to it. And then, as I mentioned, the great shock ending as well. Going back to the time period, some of the critical reviews for the film, and they were generally pretty positive. In Variety, this is what one of their writers wrote shortly after the release. This movie, quote, validates the entire concept of remakes, end quote. And I think that's a pretty good assessment. There have always been people, and I'm one of them, skeptical of remakes, but this is one of those films that justifies the attempt, because sometimes the remake does actually improve on the original. You also have a celebrated film critic, the late Gene Siskel, who often expressed disdain for horror films. It was certainly not his favorite genre, but he gave this film a clear thumbs up and generally got good reviews. I think, if anything, appreciation for it has grown since 1978. It's really considered a classic of both horror and sci-fi. It's a terrific movie. 3.5 stars from me for 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Tracy, what ranking would you give to this one?
Well, I thought it was really great. I know that some viewers today might think it's like a little bit of a slow burn at the beginning, but it's totally worth a watch. It's a classic film, like you mentioned, and, would totally resonate with today's culture with, the paranoia, the idea of conformity, conspiracy theorists, and the last moments of the ending between Veronica Cartwright and Donald Sutherland's characters. I did not really remember that part and forgot. But I read that ending was a total secret. And the only people that knew about that was Donald Sutherland and the director. So, not to give it away, but when Veronica Cartwright kind of screamed at the end, it was true terror. She had no idea that was actually happening. So I gave this movie a 3.5 stars as well. It was just fantastic. And it was like a weirdly feel good movie. I really enjoyed it. And, just a couple of little side notes about Donald Sutherland too. For anybody doesn't know, he was actually born in St. John, New Brunswick, and he was raised in Bridgewater, Nova Scotia for many years. So he's also a fellow maritimer, a Canadian icon that will be greatly missed. And, he was a kind human and just loved by so many people. And that is one person that I would have loved to have had a conversation with. The history that he holds and just his entire career. He has a Hollywood Walk of Fame star from 2011 and a Canadian Walk of Fame star from the year 2000. And like you mentioned, so many iconic movies, Bruce. You've got MASH, The Dirty Dozen, and, Animal House, he was in that movie as well. And it's just a comedic role. Right. And he actually filmed that at the exact same time he was filming Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So he has the curly locks in that movie too. So yeah, that's right. I love the movie, and I love Donald Sutherland as an actor and as a human. So yeah, 3.5.
All right, we both agree 3.5 stars for this one. It certainly holds up from the late 1970s. One final thought on Donald Sutherland, Tracy. One of the great father-son combinations of actors. I mean, it's hard to think of, outside of the Barrymore family and a few other families, you think of a father and son where both have really achieved A-list stardom. They're different types of actors. Kiefer is, I think, the handsomer and more athletic and maybe more of an action star in some ways. Some of the things that he's done, like 24, that very innovative show that first debuted about 15, 20 years ago. Different kinds of actors. I don't know if they really look alike in a lot of ways, but both very effective, both outstanding careers, but in different ways.
Absolutely. Kiefer Sutherland is a great actor as well. Just fantastic. He takes after his father in so many ways. And, it's an iconic family. There's also, Kiefer has a twin sister and another brother, and they both pursue acting, but I don't recall any episodes that any films that they've been in. And I want to say that Donald and Kiefer have appeared in one movie together. I just can't remember the name of the title offhand. It might be The Forgotten, maybe. It was a Western film.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was just the one time, and it wasn't that long ago. But I know it was something they really wanted to do, and it was nice for them to have that opportunity. So Great life, great career. Comes to an end, Donald Sutherland, but we'll continue to enjoy his work for a long time with all these film roles and also a few TV roles mixed in as well. So we've talked about Invasion of the Body Snatcher, really the seminal horror film for Donald Sutherland. Now, Tracy, we're going to move on to a newer film, a film that came out earlier in 2024. It's the much-hyped film called Immaculate, and it begins with a kind of a flashback scene. So we have this young nun, Sister Mary, seen trying to escape for some reason from a Catholic convent. But before she can leave, she's actually knocked out by someone, dragged along the ground, and then Sister Mary is placed in a coffin that appears to have been buried underground. When she wakes up, she realizes one of the worst nightmares that I think anybody could imagine being, that of being buried alive. And we can only assume that she runs out of air very soon after that and does indeed pass away. Then after this flashback, and I don't think they specified exactly how far back this little episode went, but then we go to the main part of the story. So we're in the here and now, and we have this young nun in training named Sister Cecilia, and she is played by one of Hollywood's rising stars, Sydney Sweeney, who is assigned to work at a convent in Italy. For some reason, things haven't worked out for her in the States. She asked to be transferred, so they send her to this convent that it's not in Rome, it's outside of Rome, and it's a place that houses aging nuns near the ends of their lives. And the younger nuns and the ones who are in training, part of their job is to take care of the older dying nuns. Now, right from the start, Cecilia is greeted in less than pleasant fashion by an older nun who comes right out and questions her dedication. I mean, I don't think has ever met Cecilia before this. Who knows if she's seen her file, but right off the bat, she's like questioning, why are you doing this? Why would you want to come here? That's like the last thing somebody wants to hear the first day of a new job. Other people at the convent also give off a bad vibe. And the one exception to this is Father Sal, who appears to have been the one who orchestrated her move to Italy. So Father Sal warmly welcomes Sister Cecilia to her new position at the convent. And then we soon learn a little bit about Cecilia's past, childhood experience, very frightening. She was out on a lake. I guess it was supposed to have been frozen, but she fell through the ice, was trapped under the ice, apparently was almost dead for 7 minutes, but was then somehow revived. And after that, she decides at some point to become a nun. Now, shortly after arriving at this convent, Cecilia takes her final vows in becoming a nun. Then, almost immediately, she begins to see troubling signs. A few different things happen. First of all, she sees an older nun who has really bad scars on her feet. Now, when I was watching the movie, at first I thought it was a cross, but I guess it was just general scarring. It wasn't necessarily the shape of a cross, but the scarring was so bad that it really caught Cecilia's attention. Then Sister Cecilia sees hooded ghost-like figures in her room. We as the viewer are not really sure. Is she dreaming? Is this a product of nightmares? Is she really seeing these things? We're not exactly sure about that. And then later on, Cecilia becomes ill for some reason, starts throwing up, and throws up so violently that she actually loses a tooth in the process. And that's sort of a sign that something's going on here. So Cecilia is eventually brought into the office of Father Sal, and then he begins, kind of in a strange way, to ask her a series of questions. It's like she's under suspicion of doing something wrong when there's no evidence that that's happened. But the questions have to do whether she has ever had relations with a man. And Cecilia denies this repeatedly, and you kind of believe her. She seems very honest. She's wondering, where is this coming from? Why would they be thinking that this has happened in my past? How would they have any idea of this? Well, eventually, during this meeting with Father Sal, and there's other nuns in the room too, he is informed that, lo and behold, somehow she is pregnant with a male child. And it's then explained that this is a new Immaculate conception, hence the name of the movie, Immaculate. Other nuns start to congratulate her for being the next Virgin Mary who is going to be giving birth to a savior of some sort. So this is all very stunning and pretty surprising to me. I wasn't expecting that. Then we have an attempt on Cecilia's life as another young nun, Sister Isabel, who apparently thought she was going to be the one having the Immaculate Conception. So she's jealous, tries to drown Sister Cecilia in a pool. I guess maybe for unknown reasons at the time, but eventually we do learn that, yeah, she's upset that she was not the one chosen for this conception. And then not long after all this, Isabel turns up dead. Not only that, but she is severely disfigured in the process. I mean, it looks like she was really beaten badly. Mm-hmm. And then eventually Cecilia does give birth, but that does not exactly go swimmingly, to say the least. So that's kind of an overview of what happens in the movie. And I'll give my thoughts on whether I liked it or not in a moment, but I want to start with you. What are your thoughts on Immaculate? Good, bad, somewhere in the middle?
I'd say somewhere in the middle. You know, it was, I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I thought the aesthetics were beautiful. You know, the movie being filmed in Italy, the convent and the other scenery felt very familiar, like something we may have seen before. And I'll just say that. I haven't, I didn't read too much about this movie before I watched it. The only thing I saw was the trailer. And I think I saw the trailer like a few months ago when it originally came out at the theater. I honestly went into this movie with the preconceived notion that it was going to be like a Rosemary's Baby type movie with, you know, devil worshiping vibes. And I was waiting for that for the whole entire film. But didn't really transpire in my mind. Like you mentioned, the opening scene with the nun being buried alive. It took me a few minutes to realize that incident had happened prior to Cecilia coming to the event, to the convent. I thought it might have been like a flashback moment for her that we were witnessing prior to the start of the story. You know, it left me with some questions, like you mentioned about the ghosts in her room and, you know, the nuns with the red mask faces, like, yeah, who were they? What did they represent? And, you know, the Father Sal that you had mentioned, I was curious about why he took such an interest in Cecilia. I didn't trust that character right from the beginning. So that means the actor did an excellent job with his portrayal.
Yeah.
And just, you know, I found it really odd because most of the nuns were just blatantly blind as to what was happening. And I couldn't tell if they were in on all the shenanigans or if they were just innocent bystanders. But, I did feel that the movie was paying a little bit of an homage to some of the giallo films of the past. And yeah, definitely kind of different. So I'll leave it at that for right now.
Okay. You mentioned that first scene with Sister Mary, and we only find out her name by looking at the cast on IMDb, because her name, I don't think, is mentioned in that initial scene. So she wakes up, she's in the coffin underground. I still don't really understand the connection of that to the rest of the story. Do you? Did you see what that connection was?
Well, I don't really know. I kind of suspect that maybe she might have been a subject of a previous attempt. And maybe that's why she was trying to escape the convent. And the nuns and the priest didn't want the secret to get out as
Okay.
to what was going down in the convent. But it was confusing. It was really confusing to kind of start with that. And it didn't really get explained. I can just maybe think that might have been the reason. But I seriously thought it was kind of like a, I guess just kind of a glimpse into something that we might have seen from her, Cecilia, right?
Yeah.
But it was an odd way to start the movie.
Well, you're sharper than me because you got something out of that, and I didn't really at all. And I think your explanation makes sense. So I'm going to go with that for now. In terms of my general thoughts on this one, Tracy, I thought Immaculate was pretty good. It was a much hyped film, in part because Sydney Sweeney has become this breakout star. And here she is starring in a horror film. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of anticipation going into this. And I think Sweeney actually delivered. I really feel the best parts of this movie were carried by Sydney Sweeney's performance. Up until this film, I have to be honest with you, I had really never been impressed by her as an actress. I mean, she's attractive, but I don't think I can really name any of her previous roles where I thought, wow, she's really a young star. But here, I thought she was excellent in this role. And to be honest, she was reminiscent of another actress, the lesser known Nell Tiger Free, who starred in The First Omen, which we talked about earlier, and which bears a lot of resemblance to this movie. Now, I'm not sure which film was made first, because I read somewhere where Immaculate has been in the thought process for like 7 or 8 years. So maybe their idea came first and then came The First Omen. I'm not really sure, but there are a lot of similarities. I mean, you've got 2 young nuns in training being assigned to Italy, one in the modern day, one back in the early 1970s. And you very quickly realize that they've been enveloped in some sort of a conspiracy that's putting them in danger. So there's a lot of similarities in terms of the 2 films. But again, getting back to Sweeney, she's very natural in this role. Her character is believable, likable. And I got to say this, some of her reactions to terror are just incredible. Sweeney puts forth some of the greatest screams I have ever heard in a horror movie. And people might think, well, does that really take a lot of talent? And I say, yeah, it does. Some people scream and it's not that convincing. Sweeney makes it convincing. Her screams are delivered in such a painful but believable way, really powerful. And we see this toward the end of the movie. Again, I don't want to give away too much, but again, the birth doesn't go all that great. And that's what creates the screams from Sydney Sweeney. But in terms of screaming, she is a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10. I mean, she's up there with, Jamie Lee Curtis and some of the great horror actresses of the past. So that was really the most positive impression I got from the film was her performance. I mean, without her, this could have been a really bad movie. I think with her, it's pretty decent. Now, on the other side of the coin, the main drawback to the film is that it's a little bit thin. I would like to have learned more about Sister Cecilia, Sweeney's character, why she was selected for this quote-unquote immaculate conception. We did learn about almost drowning, being declared dead, and then getting revived after like 7 minutes. But there wasn't a lot of other background information presented to us. And I don't know if that got edited out. I'm not sure. So the storyline is a little bit on the simple side and could have used more development. And usually I'm on the opposite side of the coin. Usually I'm one who says, make the film shorter, get to the point. This one was about an hour and a half. I think they could have extended it, hour 45, hour 50, done a little more character development, told us more about Sister Cecilia, might have answered some questions, might have made more sense. So that's one of the drawbacks. The other is one I mentioned earlier. The film is so strikingly similar to The First Omen, it does feel a little bit repetitive to those who have seen both movies. And again, that might not be the fault of Immaculate. Maybe The First Omen copied this one. I don't really know. Maybe it's just a coincidence. But when you see two films released in the same year within a span of a few weeks, one right after another, I guess the second one is going to irritate you a little bit because it's so close to the first one. And again, it may not have been the fault of the people involved with Immaculate. Overall, I'm going to say it's a pretty good, above average film. Sweeney really proves her acting ability. Up until now, I had questions. I was a skeptic. No more. I think she's a future star, maybe a current star as well. I think it's a pretty good, solid movie. It didn't live up to the hype, but trying to be objective, I give it 3 stars. What are your thoughts on Immaculate, Tracy?
So I will definitely say, I agree with you. The First Omen and Immaculate, they were quite similar, including when the nun took a dive off the convent building and fell to the ground. Like, that is so quirky that you would have it in both movies. Oddly enough, and I feel if you combined both storylines together, the First Omen and the Immaculate together, I think the viewer could have had one heck of a film to watch. Where one film lacked, the other kind of picked it up. And if you just put them together, I think it would have been a great movie. I've never seen anything with Sydney Sweeney before, but I kind of recognize her. I think she did really, really well here. She had a very strict matter-of-fact approach. She was kind of like emotionless up to a point, but the ending was absolutely horrific. And the terror that just ripped through those final moments was, on the scale of extreme. Like, it was huge. I'm not going to give the ending away either, but I couldn't figure out if the baby was like a failed experiment of the priest, if it was a monster or a demonic creature, or if it really was like a carbon copy of the Savior reborn. I didn't feel that it was like an original storyline, but I think they took what they had and they made the most of it. It was entertaining and definitely worth watching on streaming platforms. Sweeney, she was a producer on this movie. I read that she originally auditioned for this back in 2014, and then the movie just wasn't made. They kind of shelved it. But she's responsible for getting this project back on track all these years later, and had the script revised and got the funding to make this movie. I thought it was good. She was excellent, but I'm only going to give it a 2.5 stars. I kind of feel bad about that, but yeah, 2.5 for me.
Well, I think that's fair. I might be a little generous with 3, but I think you're definitely in the ballpark. So you go with 2.5. I go with 3. As far as the birth, I don't think we really know because they don't really show us. We can only sort of guess based on her reaction what might have transpired at the birth. That's a question mark. Maybe they're trying to set the stage for a sequel. I don't know. So that part of the ending is nebulous, but her reaction does make it memorable. No question.
Yes, it does. That I've never seen anything like that. I'm a huge horror fan, and that sent shivers throughout my entire body. Just that performance right there. I was like, man, they have to like monetize that scream for future roles.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was really powerfully done. So maybe we'll see a sequel. I hope we see more of Sydney Sweeney in horror roles. I thought she was really, really good. The best part of this film. She was really the only actor that I think either of us were familiar with, because looking at the names, it seemed like they were all native Italian actors and not really people associated with Hollywood, certainly no brand names.
No, exactly. I would kind of took a scan through the cast list, and that was the only name that I recognized. It's possible the rest of the cast were well known, maybe in Italy,
Yeah.
but definitely not for the United States or Canada, I don't believe.
And as you said, the guy who played Father Sal, he did a very good job. He did a nice performance in showing both sides of his character. So even though we've not familiar with him, haven't really heard of him prior to this film, doesn't mean he's not a capable actor. So again, you give it 2.5 stars. I give it 3. I think we both would say, yeah, it's definitely worth watching on streaming. Certainly worth the 1.5 hours of time. And as I said, it could easily have been significantly longer, might have helped the project. I wonder if there will be an extended director's cut that maybe gives us a different impression. Sometimes that is the case. So those are the 2 movies we wanted to discuss in this particular edition of the Ghostly Gallery podcast, the new film Immaculate, and then the vintage film Invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1978. Great example of the terrific work of Donald Sutherland. We have just a couple of minutes left here, Tracy. And something I mentioned to you off air was a recent article at the Bloody Disgusting website. That's actually what it's calling. That's what they call themselves. I'm not calling that website those names. It is bloodydisgusting.com. So they had an interesting article written by Megan Navarro, who is one of their top editors. And she gave an assessment, the first 6 months of horror films in 2024. She listed what she considered the top 10 films of the year. The First Omen was included. Immaculate was included. A film we talked about earlier, Abigail, was included. The one omission, which I just find almost unfathomable, is the absence of what the film that we both loved, maybe the best film that we've both seen in 2024, and that is Late Night with the Devil. How in the world could that not be included in a top 10?
Oh my gosh. I was shocked when you told me that it wasn't included on that list. How can you talk about 2024 horror movies without putting that as, close to number 1 as possible, let alone just excluding it from the conversation? That movie was phenomenal. And to not make that list is kind of disappointing. I took a look at some of the others, so I'm really surprised that it was omitted.
I mean, it was definitely better than Abigail. Abigail was probably a subpar film. We talked about, when we did a show on it, we talked about how they really did not use Kevin Durand properly. They wasted his character. And there were some other problems with it. And it was an exceedingly violent film, more bloody than it needed to be. So definitely Late Night with the Devil, better than Abigail. I thought The First Omen was pretty good, but I don't think it was anywhere near at the level of Late Night with the Devil. I just don't. I know it's subjective, but I just don't see how you couldn't even include. Maybe you don't think it's the best one. That's fine. Maybe you don't think it's in the top 3 or top 4, but not to include it in the top 10 films for the year? Wow.
No, exactly. And it's kind of shocking, actually. And just again, considering some of the other movies that made it on that list, it just kind of leaves me shaking my head a little bit.
Maybe I'll give you an assignment and try to get Megan Navarro on the show to defend this.
Oh, I could definitely do that.
Yeah. I don't know if she'll come on after this, but and look, I'm not trying to disparage her as a writer. I know that she has encyclopedic knowledge of film. She's been writing for Bloody Disgusting for many, many years. It's just this one omission that was just really, really hard for us to accept. And I don't know, maybe she forgot. I guess that's a possible explanation. She might say, oh, yeah, gee, that was one I meant to include and I didn't. I guess we'll have to wait and see. But we really want to see more acclaim for this great film with David Desmalchin, Late Night with the Devil. I think it's going to become known as a classic, but obviously others disagree.
Oh my goodness. It'll be interesting come the end of the year to see what other films will make the list. You know, for some reason, 2024, there's a massive amount of horror movies that have already been released and just so many more to come. And some of them are already on my I need to see this list. For example, Nosferatu.
Mm-hmm.
And, as I mentioned to you earlier, too, I mean, there's a Hugh Grant movie that's coming out later next month, I believe, or actually, sorry, November. And then, you have some of the Russell Crowe horror movies that are coming out, and there's still so many more. There's a Nicolas Cage one coming out on, I believe, July 12th, and it's called Long Legs. Like, the list just keeps growing and growing and growing. So I can't wait to see what everything is going to roll out here soon.
When you told me about Long Legs off air, I assumed it was a movie about spiders. You said, no, it's not the case. It's about a killer, right?
Yeah, it's a serial killer movie.
Okay. Yeah. Do
With
we
a
know
horror
is Cage the good guy? Is he the killer? Do we know that?
Yeah, he's the serial killer.
He is. Okay. Well, I could see that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, there are some good films on the docket for the second half of 2024. I think the one that's probably the most highly anticipated is Nosferatu, which is not scheduled, I believe, to come out until December. That's a film that a lot of people are looking forward to seeing. The director is the same guy who gave us The Witch, which is an absolute classic too. So some great films for us to look forward to. Well, Tracy, thanks for your thoughts on that, and also for your great analysis of the two movies we talked about in tonight's episode, Immaculate, starring Sydney Sweeney, and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, starring the late, great Donald Sutherland. Thank you, Tracy.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. And again, always so much fun. And it was great going back and looking at a few Donald Sutherland movies and, catching up on his memories. So thank you so much for that.
Absolutely. A man who certainly deserves it. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit more about Donald Sutherland, some of his other films, as this summer of Ghostly Gallery podcasts continues. Our thanks go to Tracy. Of course, our thanks go to all of our loyal listeners as well. We thank you for being part of this Museum of the Macabre. And we will hope that you join us once again right here in the Ghostly Gallery.